Hello everyone, and thanks for tuning in to the Fat Feminist Witch Pdcast. Today I'm interviewing Lilith Dorsey, voodoo priestess and magical consultant, about her new book Love Magic, which was published by Weiser Books last year. As I mentioned on the blog around the time of Imbolc or midwinter earlier this month, this season is an excellent time for love magic and all other magic to bring about really serious change in your life. And this book is a tremendous resource for spells like that. It's got something for everybody, no matter what your skill level, your sexual orientation, your gender, or your marital status. I gave the book a 5 crystal ball out of 5 rating, and you'll see why when you pick it up or when you head over to thefatfeministwitch.com and check out the review on the blog. You guys are really going to love today's interview. In it, Lilith and I discuss some common issues with love magic, some of the love-centric requests she gets in her consulting business, and how white practitioners and witches can be a little bit more respectful in their exploration of African diaspora spiritualities. And of course, we talk a lot about love. So here it is, everybody. Lilith Dorsey. So why don't you get started with telling me a little bit about your background in magic and spiritual practice and stuff like that? Like, how did you get started with magic?
Well, I feel like I've always been a spiritual person. You know, I had 2 separate conversations about this yesterday where people were asking me. And I remember even as an early child, I think, because, again, of the situation I was in, it was very, traumatic. There was a lot going on. I grew up in Brooklyn. I'm still in Brooklyn now. But, so there was a lot of rough people, I guess. So, there was a lot of really extreme situations, and I feel like very quickly I learned how to draw and listen to the wisdom of my ancestors and, the things that I had around me to sort of transform and move forward from where I was. Yeah.
You have a very interesting mix of cultures and traditions in your spiritual practice that I can just see from your biography that's offered. How do you feel you got pulled in all of these different directions with your spirituality?
Well, again, I think that comes from the ancestors. I'm African American and Native American on my father's side, and my mother's Sicilian and Scottish. So there was a lot of mix going on in there, and I learned, what I could and what I was honored enough to take away from the heritage and culture that they have. So, I moved forward in whatever way was open to me. So, and there are a lot of similarities. I'm not going to say they're all the same or something like that, but there's definitely things that you do in Sicilian Strega or in Celtic witchcraft that are very similar to some of the things we do in New Orleans voodoo. Which is also a mix of things. New Orleans voodoo is a gumbo of things.
Very big mixture of things for sure.
Yeah, and that's, what my primary training is in, so I got, to answer the rest of your question about how I got involved, I belong to the New Orleans Voodoo Spiritual Temple, and I've been a member there for over 20 years, and I also run my own spiritual house here in New York, and we do feasts and ceremonies, and, I have godkids, and they get initiations and things like that, so my own spiritual practice sort of grew up alongside my academic practice, which I think is unusual for a lot of practitioners out there. But, I was in school and I was studying anthropology like a good little, liberal would, trying to learn more respectfully about other cultures and things like that. And I just got shut down so many times, because this is your show. I'll reiterate the fact that it was by the, entitled male patriarchy, honestly, and they didn't want to see that there was a feminine spirituality. They didn't want to see that there was a spirituality by people of color that was thriving in this country. So I sort of really wanted to document that and understand that better so I could present it to them in a more honest and respectful way.
Yeah, absolutely. I went for history instead of anthropology.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Yeah, and I couldn't really do it very long. I was getting in a lot of trouble. I was writing a lot of spiritual essays and stuff like that, or about women and spirituality, and they're like, you got to write about something else. I'm like, yeah, but everybody wrote about other stuff already. That other stuff's already in the books.
No, I understand. I think it's a struggle even today. I have godchildren that are in college today, and they say it's a constant struggle that they have with their educators to sort of present what for them is a more valid reality, and they meet with a lot of opposition, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of hard to say, but I want to do something else instead of that, because I've heard that a million times, or other people are doing that, or I feel like there's something else to say, and a lot of times you get a lot of pushback in college, and it sucks.
Yeah, it's very discouraging. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have some really great teachers, even if they weren't pagan necessarily, had an open mind, and they were willing to, entertain a different way of doing things. A lot of women, fortunately, which was nice.
Yeah, that always helps. That always helps. So do you ever feel like, you say these cultures have a lot of stuff in common, so I just want to reiterate, just in case other people didn't read your bio. So in your bio, it mentions that you are a voodoo priestess. You train in several other traditions, including Celtic, Afro-Caribbean, such as Santeria, and Native American spiritualities. So do you ever feel like there's any sort of conflict between any of those, or the way they work? Do you ever have to make a choice, like, I'm going to do this in a more voodoo style as opposed to a Celtic style?
I mean, I think, like I mentioned, my primary work is in the voodoo tradition, and again, I want to make a point that a lot of people have a negative connotation to that word. Yeah. And for me, it's all about reclaiming, that's what people think of, that's what people go to. And I want to have a positive reclaiming about that word.
Absolutely.
And it's an ancestral practice, like I mentioned, and I don't really think there's any overlap to me. There's certain things that I do as part of my Native American spirituality to honor, in that way, and leave offerings and, go to sweats and things like that, and have that experience in lodge. And then there's separate things I do to honor other parts of my heritage, so I don't think it's not really a choice of, oh, I'm going to go to this or I'm going to go to that. It's more that, okay, today is a time and a space and a place and a sacred opening for honoring this part of my heritage. And I go with that, whenever it feels right.
Yeah, that's very cool. That's an excellent answer.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, and I definitely saw, like in the book, you can see 3 or 4 spells in a row, and you can definitely see the inspiration from each different culture or different herbs used in different spells the whole time. And I thought it was really cool how well they all still seem to flow together, even though they're all very different. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I was researching this book my whole life. You know what I mean? I've always had different issues that presented around the relationships that I had and the relationships of my friends and godchildren and clients and things like that. So I was always sort of questioning people from other traditions that I came across at different events or festivals or just, in my daily life about what their solutions and, inspiration was around this area. So it is very well, I think, like there's something for everybody in here.
There really is. I was actually going through it with my sister, and we were looking at a few things, and she was pointing out stuff that she was like, oh, that seems really useful, and it's something that I had, it was near something else I had thought was more useful. We each found something different that we really liked. So
that's great.
It's a really interesting mix of stuff. I really liked it.
Thank you.
Yeah. How do you feel like your practice evolved to include so much love magic specifically? Like, have you always been very focused on love and relationships, or is that something that kind of built up over time?
I think I always was. I just think that's, my parents named me Lilith. I have to say that, I don't have anything against magical names, but, I didn't choose this one. They gave this one to me. So yeah. My connection to her has always been really strong. And then, you mentioned I'm an initiate in Lukumi, which is, more commonly known as Santeria or Santo. And I'm a daughter of Oshun. So again, we're talking about someone, there's a lot of other qualities to both Lilith and Oshun, but If you talk about the way my life was shaped from a very early time, I believe that it was influenced by these sort of primal and powerful love goddesses.
That's fantastic. That's really cool. I was actually wondering if Lilith was a given name, or if it was something you chose. So that's pretty interesting.
No, I probably would have chose something else, honestly.
Yeah, honestly, I don't hear the name Lilith very often, except in sort of this, like a fantasy context. So I was actually wondering.
There's a few that, like, of the younger generation. I met one girl, she was in her early teens, and she was telling me, her name was Lilith and her sister's name was Kali, and they got thrown out of a Hindu cab once because the guy was like, I'm not taking you anywhere.
That's fantastic. Oh my God.
I know. I thought that was a great story. Yeah,
That is a great story. Oh, that would be so scary though. Their parents their parents must have been really interesting. Or they must have just imagined really interesting things for their kids.
I think so. I think for my life, Lilith, coming with that was a heavy bag, you know what I mean? Because again, I'm talking about voodoo. There's all these connotations that people have, and you mentioned my Scottish heritage. It's funny, my family clan name is Holborn, which comes from the goddess Hel. So a lot of people know about her as this kind of this female goddess that has a lot of these warrior qualities, claws and fangs and all of that stuff.
Yeah. The scary, they're the scary goddesses is what they are. They're the ones that I feel like until recently people weren't really talking about them a lot more, because I feel like for a long time there was this really general hush hush. The whole what is it? The rule of three thing kind of took over everything for a little while. For most of my life anyway, it's been like that, where everybody's like, you just don't talk about that dark stuff, and you don't talk about those dark deities, and you just don't deal with it. So I feel like now I'm just starting to learn more about goddesses like Lilith and Kali and magic related to them, and it's kind of a shame because it's cool.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, I think that they were demonized, unfortunately, by, again, a patriarchy that didn't want to accept a model of feminine power, especially if you talk about Lilith. She very early got associated with all this evil demon stuff and was not the powerful feminine force of sexuality that she really is if you go back to the very beginning and look at her.
Yeah, absolutely. She was definitely dealt a bad rap, and she was associated with everything from demons to, overt female sexuality, which was always a problem. And just right away, before Adam and Eve, she was already, a demon. So she really got the short end of the stick in that one. I'm happy to see her come back a little bit. I'm happy to see her. No,
it's beautiful.
It's great. It's really wonderful. And I think a lot of women now really need her. I think that's the reason, whether people believe in actual deities or not, I feel like that's the reason the deities are becoming a little bit more well known, and the archetypes are being adopted a little bit more, because people really need that now.
Well, I think that this kind of feminine power and fierceness and sexuality and all of this stuff, I know we were talking, not in this interview, but offline, about, the Women's March and things like that, and how there was a way for, again, this female empowerment avenue to open up in a way that's really meaningful and necessary. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's just, I feel like it's something that I started with Wicca back in the 90s, and it was super fun, but it didn't really have the the seriousness that I kind of needed. I needed kind of big magic and big help.
I understand completely.
Yeah, and I had trouble finding it, and I feel like if I had found that earlier, it wouldn't have taken me so long to be a more powerful or empowered practitioner. I feel like younger witches now really are getting a good deal with all of these stronger magical female archetypes. I feel like in 20 years from now, those witches are going to be really badass.
I hope so.
I hope so. We could definitely use them. I feel like it's going to take them a little less time to get badass than it took me. So I don't even feel like a badass. So. Not all the time, but some younger witches, they just got started right away with these stronger female archetypes. Sure. And I really like it. It's really neat. I learn a lot from younger witches that I never learned before.
No, you're right. I think they embrace their fierceness in a way that we were not allowed to.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've been doing this for 25 plus years, and it's a very different climate.
Yeah. Things have changed a lot, but I like the way magic is going right now. I like it. And this is actually the first love magic book that I've read in a long time. I stopped checking them out kind of a while ago because I found them to be a little bit too cheesy or kind of creepy.
Yes.
Yeah, love magic books used to be super creepy. They were not very relatable, and a lot of the spells in there really crossed a line for me and seemed scary. And
no, I agree. When I first started talking about it, there was a lot of questions about like, okay, is this going to be a bunch of binding spells and, things like that, and things that really interfere with somebody's will and possibly even border on psychic rape. And I think that unfortunately, that's a lot of what is out there about the books. And part of my struggle in getting the people to even open this is they think that that's what it's going to be. And it's so not that,
So
I would
not.
Never write a book like that.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's so not like that at all. You mention ethics multiple times, and you even mentioned different types of relationships a lot. Like, you mentioned polyamorous relationships and monogamous relationships multiple times, and how, all of that is fine. Just adapt this to whatever you're doing. So I feel
and I wanted to include like LGBTQ relationships as well, which I think is so underrepresented, in any pagan book, really, honestly, except by those that are specifically geared towards that market.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. So I was happy to see some other stuff in there. I saw a lot of stuff in there I've never seen before, which I really liked, though I'm not super versed in love magic. Not super versed. It's something I don't know. I've never recommended a book on love magic before, because thank you. I feel honored now. Yeah, this is the first time I've actually felt comfortable with it, and I didn't feel creeped out by anything in the book. And it seems sad. I never realized how kind of awkward they all were before. I guess I did, but I never really thought about it too much.
Well, it's so important to me. And then I started thinking about, there wasn't really a book that I loved about love. And it's, it's the basis for life itself. And that's really important,
It's really important. It's super important. So you run your own magical consulting business. How much of that do you feel, like, how many of your customers do you feel like come in for love magic? Is that the main thing that people come in and ask about?
It used to be about 50-50. I would say clients would sit down and I'd go, okay, is it love or money? And then there'd be maybe 5% of the people were concerned about their spirituality. But most of the time it was love or money. But I think definitely now with the book, it's more love. Yeah,
that's really. I got really excited when I thought about it, because I watch Practical Magic way too many times. I've seen it too many times in my life. It's a sad addiction. But I always think of the ants, and I know no one, is stabbing doves through the heart or anything, but I got really excited with the idea of, the magical matchmaker. I didn't really realize this was still a viable career. I'm really excited about it. Can you tell me a little bit more about, like, what kind of magical love services you provide to people that come in?
Well, I think the most important thing when somebody has an issue with love that they're trying to heal or get results about is that they do a reading about it. I use a variety of things when I do a reading. I use tarot cards, dowsing rods, crystals, all different things when I'm determining, what's best for someone to proceed. And that's really because I believe that magic at its core operates like medicine, and we've got to have a diagnosis period first so we can see what's going on. You mentioned love magic, and I was teaching at an event in New Orleans, and I got in the cab, and the guy's like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "Well, I'm teaching this aphrodisiac cooking class for all different foods and herbs and stuff like that for love." And he was like, "Well, I love peanuts. I put peanuts in everything, and it gets me and my wife going, and we do it all the time." And I'm like, wow. I mean, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, I spend a lot of my time with a little girl taking care of her named Phoenix. And, she's allergic to peanuts, as a lot of people out there are. So for one person, there could be deathly allergic to peanuts. For another person, this is what gets him going and his wife going. And so you need to have that diagnosis phase of things to see what kind of herbs and oils and incense and crystals and magic you're going to need to improve your situation. Yeah. Sometimes, you mentioned in the book you like my stories. My favorite story is the Gotta Have Pat story. And, a friend of a friend, he actually counseled this person, was obsessed in their relationship. They wanted to have this person, Pat, back in their lives. They had an altar burning to Pat. They had candles. They went to every practitioner in the city trying to get this relationship working. And eventually they did get back together, but then they both died of AIDS like 6 months later. So, you need to have a reading first to see, is this the best relationship for you? Maybe it's not going to be the best relationship. Yeah. Maybe something else is going to be better for you. So that's why we do a reading first, just to see, maybe you need peanuts, maybe you need rose petals, maybe you need a completely different situation.
Yeah.
So maybe you're looking in the wrong place. So I think that's the first thing that we do. And then we usually, again, through divination and also conversation with the person, I determine what it is they're going to need. Maybe they're going to need a bath. Maybe they're going to need a spiritual oil that they put on every day. Maybe they're going to need to go to the cemetery. I do a lot of fertility magic. So sometimes, ironically enough, those people need to go back to their ancestors and talk to them about they want to continue on and they want to bring this new life, forth. So they need to go to the cemetery and leave some offerings. And some people are willing to do it and some people aren't. And, that determines the success of the situation.
Do you often have people that you realize have just, disregarded what you've said to them or just ignored it or never done it? Does that happen a lot?
I think so. Not a lot, but I would say at least probably 10% of the time, I'll tell people they need to do one thing and they're not capable of doing that. And I don't get upset about it. It just seems to me that they're not ready to move forward in a way.
Yeah.
I'm good friends with a witch named Dorothy Morrison, who a lot of people are familiar with. And Morrison used to like to say, she'd call them the yeah buts, that they'd just be like, you'd tell them to go do something. They'd be like, well, yeah, but there was always a reason. I had one person tell me they can't get a tea light. And I was like, really? You can't afford a tea light? I'm not saying you have to go out and do crazy ass, rich, expensive magic. Yeah. If all you're capable of paying for that day is a tea light from the dollar store, then go to the person was like, what's a dollar store? I'm like, I don't even know. I don't even know how to have this conversation.
I can't help you now. Like, it's a pack of 32 for $1.50. You're fine.
I'm like, I gave you the simplest thing that, again, through divination that you were capable of doing. I have another client that can't even leave the house, so he has the delivery person bring him herbs and, salt and pepper and things like that he can use to cleanse himself. So I think that everybody can do something.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I noticed that a lot of the spells had a lot of herbs and oils and stuff that I'm not really familiar with. But when I looked them up, they're really similar to like other things that I have, or they're just a different name for something that I've been using for years and didn't know the name of. So I feel like there's a lot of stuff in a lot of these spells, but it's not really all that hard to get a hold of, most of it.
Yeah, most of it. I mean, it depends where you are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yes.
If your town is 100 people, you might struggle. There might not be a shop.
You could still order this stuff over the computer or the phone or something.
Do some online shopping for some of it.
Yeah.
So in your magical consulting business, have you ever? I'm sure nothing surprises you anymore, but have you ever had anything that was a little bit strange or that actually did give you a little bit of a jolt? Like, I've never heard this.
Yes, I've had that happen a few times. It does always surprise me. People come in with things and I'm like, wow, that's okay. So I had one guy, and I have to preface this by saying he was very respectful in his contact with me, but he wanted a spell to make his penis bigger.
Oh, bless him.
Okay, this is a thing. This is a thing I've heard that is a concern of men, and I mentioned he was very respectful. Yeah. He wrote a very detailed email about he was in a nice, happy relationship, but he thought it would make this better and it would make things better. And, after we did do a reading and there was a whole bunch of things we were supposed to do. First of all, that he needed to, which you get with a lot of the aphrodisiac foods that I mentioned, they're for increasing certain vitamins in your diet so your reproductive health will be better. Yeah. So he was supposed to change his diet to eat certain different things. There were certain herbs that were supposed to help him. And then there was also some negativity he had from the past, So, I mean, I assume it worked, He
never had to come back in and keep asking, so I guess that's a good sign.
No, he didn't come back and complain explain or anything like that. So, there were also psychic exercises he was supposed to do. It was a whole variety of things. But that was a really weird one that I got,
I feel like that might be something that I think a lot of men might want to ask about, but feel like there's nothing that could actually help, or maybe they're too embarrassed.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, without getting too graphic, if you look at it scientifically, these things can, within a small range, get larger or smaller depending on the situation. So once you realize that's possible, then I feel like anything is possible.
Anything is possible. That's what magic is for. You can wish for anything.
Sure.
You really can wish for anything. You might not get it, but you can always try. Good for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope it worked, I think.
No, I think he was happy. I hope everybody in the situation was happy.
Yeah, I hope everybody had a good time with that guy.
Yes, a good time was had by all. Yes.
Yeah. So what about, you mentioned the ethics a little bit in your book a few times. You mentioned ethics, not using love magic to hurt anybody, trying hard if you don't have to control somebody's will, not to control somebody's will. Have you ever had any clients come in and ask you for things that you felt like crossed the line? And maybe a determined
Yes.
way?
Yeah, I think I have. I think that a lot of clients start out with a very simple idea of voodoo, like I mentioned, and that comes from a long history of, it's a religion that had to go through slavery and oppression and a really horrible system. So there are a lot of curses and hexes and controlling spells because they were in a situation where they were being controlled. So they fought back in whatever way they could.
Yeah, I doubt. Whenever someone tells me that magic should only be like sunshine and roses, I'm like, I feel like you don't understand how many people out there use magic and the kind of lives they live. I don't see how. I can't imagine it would be easy to see everything as sunshine and roses while you are living in with oppression and slavery. Like, it doesn't make any sense. When you start to explain it that way, it doesn't make any sense that you wouldn't use curses if this is where your magic came from.
Well, yeah, your children are being taken from you, or you're being raped, or, all of these things. This is a very hard system, or killed, beaten, all of these things, so it was very heavy on the curses and the hexes and all of that people do think of as dark. But it was dark times, and then there's a lot of ways we're in dark times today.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's a thing, but yes, there are a lot of people who come to me and they just want, I got a message this morning about they just wanted their, to control their ex and get them back. And like I said, there's a lot of things that could go into that equation. And sometimes when I do the reading, even though it doesn't seem like a good situation, it still looks like it's possible. And, some good may come of it. And if this is what this person wants, then, maybe we can put it together in a way that doesn't involve a controlling spell. Maybe you just need to communicate with the person, or maybe there's somebody who's interfering unnecessarily,
Yeah, it could just be their perspective of voodoo. They're coming in with, like you said, with a really simple idea, and you just need to be like, no, we can do something different.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm not saying there aren't situations that do call for those types of things, but no, I would not. And usually, personally, whenever I've done any kind of love magic or spells, it was completely with the permission of the other person. So that's the kind of thing I think that we need to be thinking about. If you're in a relationship and you're struggling with some aspect of it, communication or sexuality, or, just whatever, you're tired because of the kids, any of these things. I think there's ways that you can improve upon that, and you can do that together. And, that's not interfering with somebody else's will, because, you're discussing it and it's for the good of everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So I imagine helping people with love through magic is, you're like, 2 parts priestess or witch and like 1 part therapist at a certain point.
Yeah, I did. You said you liked my story. So I remember doing this event where I was reading, and it was, I live in New York. It was sort of full of hipsters and weird things. Some girls were wearing fur and they set themselves on fire. It was like a bad sitcom. But I'm in the psychic reader room.
Wow. Yeah,
and I'm in there with
crazy.
someone who's training to be a psychiatrist, and she literally put a tinfoil hat on her head and said she thought it was all fake and it was just therapy, and she was, using this as part of her research.
Whoa.
And I was like, wow, this is what we've come to.
Yeah,
and people went to her. People sat there and got the tinfoil hat reading. But to me, I think there's a certain part of counseling where, love is so important and it's so all-encompassing, and it's very easy for us to think negatively. So there is a part of what I do in the work that is kind of like helping people stay focused on what's actually happening in the situation, helping people remember to have self-love and self-care, and all of those things, because that's going to benefit them in the long run, whatever happens with their love situation.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned things like platonic love, friendship, family love. The one lady who found her perfect soulmate in a very nice German Shepherd. Like, you mentioned that stuff a lot.
Yes, yes.
I really enjoyed a lot of... I did try one of these spells that was in your universal love spells. I tried the Bob Marley one to make
Sweet!
to make my house feel a little bit more calm. I have a Bob Marley record. I put it on. It has One Love right on it.
Nice.
And I happen to have all the votive candles in the right colors, and
that's great.
Yeah, I really liked it, and I liked that I got that out of a love magic book, right? Like, my house had been a little bit all over the place, and I tried that out, and everything kind of mellowed out, and I'm like, I can't believe I found this out of a book, Bright Red Hearts, Valentine's Love Magic. So
it was his birthday too this week. Did you know that?
No, I didn't. Was it? Gosh, that's something I'm
Yeah, because I go by one of on my way to work, I go by one of the streets that he used to live on in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
And I was, going to go leave offerings and stuff like that when I heard it was his birthday. I can't remember what day. It might have been Monday or Tuesday. But, yeah, it was his birthday.
That makes so much sense. I've been listening to him all week.
That's funny.
It just, he just, that happens to me a lot. Especially with magic, or with music, I mean. With Spotify, I'll just be like, you know what I haven't listened to in a long time? And then for a straight week, I can't listen to anything else. And it's always something like that.
Right.
It's his birthday, or something's going on with that person, or...
Yeah.
So that happens a lot with with music. Your book actually, your book is kind of, this is kind of an odd thing to say, but your book almost has kind of a soundtrack. Like, I got a lot of songs stuck in my head when I was reading your book. Like, some of your book sounds a lot like a lot of Nina Simone songs. Like, a lot.
Yeah. I've been doing a lot of Nina Simone lately. But yeah, I feel like I don't play anything. I'm also a dancer by trade and a filmmaker, but I do have a connection to a lot of musicians. I was a choreographer for Dr. John, the jazz musician, and I've always, my first boyfriend was the producer for Baby Got Back.
Nice.
So I always seem to be around a lot of musicians for some reason or another. It's my kind of energy, I think.
Yeah, and you can feel it with this book. I'm a music person. I really love music. I can't play any instruments either, but I can tell you what song is on the radio when the volume's only at 1 and I've heard 2 notes. So, but a lot of your book, I couldn't stop turning on the music while I was listening to it. Like I said, a lot of Nina Simone and then Bob Marley.
That's great.
Yeah, and some Screamin' Jay Hawkins. I couldn't stop listening to them when I was reading your book.
He's great. I just wrote about him. He's fantastic. I had no idea. Something like an insane amount of kids after he died. So 50 plus. I don't even know. He was a busy man.
And now he's got 90-something grandkids.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, he was a really, let's say, interesting guy. He was a really interesting guy. And I feel like not enough people listen to his music in depth. Like, everyone knows I Put a Spell on You, but he had so much amazing stuff, and he covered a bunch of Tom Waits songs, and he did them way better than Tom Waits ever did, and I love how weird Tom Waits is. So yeah, I love Screamin' Jay Hawkins and his jumping around and his screaming and his really
I love this intersection
sounds
of performance and ritual, and he really nailed it, man.
He was just, I can't imagine what it was like to see him perform live. I bet it was like what people think like Alice Cooper or Marilyn Manson concerts are like, sure. Like a lot of performance with it. And I don't know, there's something about your book that is very, very musical, even when you're not outright mentioning music. And it was just
thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I really do.
It was kind of like this weird, interesting thing I noticed about it. not all books are like that, but this one really was. So,
oh, that's nice.
Yeah, tips for anyone out there reading it. Make sure you listen to music while you're reading it.
Right.
So you said
I'm an old deadhead, I'll confess, you know.
You know what? No one else loves the Grateful Dead. I still love the Grateful Dead. It's
Me
cheesy,
too.
but it makes me feel good.
No, I do. I mean, I took my daughter when she was little. She's like, all her friends are jealous that she actually went and saw Jerry while he was still alive. I was like, of course she did, you know?
Yeah,
So.
I unfortunately never got to see them, but I did get to go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame when I was a teenager.
Sweet.
And I spent some time with Jerry's guitars. It's pretty
well,
pretty
and
fun.
it's so cool because I actually, in the long run, like you said, always being around musicians, I ended up doing tour after they died because I was friends with Mark Caron, who took over for Jerry. So I ended up hanging out with Phil and Bobby and all of that. So that was a trip, you know?
Very cool.
Wow, I'm actually hanging out with these people. This is great, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, man. I knew it. I knew that's why I heard music when I was reading your book.
Oh yeah, there's like
why.
music wherever I go.
Yeah,
you
this
know,
is exactly why.
It.
It just comes out of you. It's got to, because it's all the way through this book. It was really bizarre. I've never.
That's
I don't know.
good.
I've never really noticed that before, unless I'm reading a book about music. So that was really cool.
Yeah. No, that's great that you say that because I don't usually think that, you know, because I did in addition to anthro, I did my graduate studies in film. So cool. I feel like there's a lot of film references in there too. You know, there's a lot of kinds of, you know, so people can get that immersive experience, not just with the sound, but with the visuals too, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really fun book. I knew it was mostly spells, so I didn't expect there to be so much to, sounds weird, but like so much to read.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
There's a difference between reading like a story or a paragraph as opposed to like a spell or a list of ingredients. So
right.
It was a lot to read. It was really neat. You said you've been working on it your whole life, but how did you actually decide to come down and like get it all together and write yourself a love magic book?
Well, I think that I really wanted to write a cookbook, actually.
There's a lot of recipes in here that I've got to try, by the way. They sound great.
Yeah. I mentioned my daughter. She works for a Michelin star chef. I've always been a foodie. You know, I sent her to food school at Cornell where they have, you know, Ivy League food school. So
nice. Very nice.
I'm just totally, and even as I was growing up, the magic was all about the food, you know, because that was like the last bastion of magic that women were allowed to have, you know, and even when we talk about the resistance movements, you know, I had a friend that was in the Panthers and she was like, the women were always in the kitchen, you know, and I don't think that has to be a bad thing. I think that can be a really beautiful thing because it's influencing, you know, what nourishes our souls, literally, you know, we absolutely have to eat, so we might as well have it be something magical. But they didn't want it to be just spells, so it grew into a love magic book that also just recipes. So it grew into a love magic book that also includes spells and potions and baths and things like that. So it just sort of evolved over time.
Yeah, there's enough in there that you could you could work in, you know, a different love spell with everything you do or eat that day. If you wanted to, I mean, if that's how much you wanted to incorporate love magic into your life, like there's enough in this book so that you could do it in like everything you do all the time. All of your baths, your food, your everything. It's kind of neat.
Well, I think that's one of the things about love. It tends to, you know, when we're in it, as my friend says in quotations, you know, it does seem to fill up all our thoughts, all our whatever, you know. So there's ways that we can do that in a positive and a magical way that'll just improve everything we're doing. Yeah,
absolutely. So what kind of things would you recommend to people who have not really tried a lot of love magic before? Like, I'm one of these people. I haven't done a lot of love magic because, like I said, it always felt a little bit creepy, but there's quite a few things in the book I want to try out now. So what kind of things would you recommend to people who are starting out with love magic?
Well, I have a really simple 3 roses spell, which I think is great for somebody that's starting out. It includes a rose of Jericho, which for those who don't know, it's also called resurrection plant. Yeah. So some people are familiar with it under that name. And it usually comes as like a dried ball of, you know, blossom. and you put it in water and it comes back to life. So this spell also uses rose water and rose quartz to sort of re-energize that area of your life. Because if you haven't done that much love magic, then, you know, you're coming from a place of less and you want to re-energize that and move it forward into, you know, your next day and the next next year and all of that. So this will help sort of reinvigorate that. And it's really simple. You know, you mentioned they're simple things to get. You know, you can get most of those at any pagan store. You can get them online, you know, and it's things. Some people probably even have rose water or rose quartz around because that's something they use in their own practices.
Yeah, some drugstores have that stuff on hand, have rose water on hand. Maybe not where I live in Canada, but I know a lot in the South drugstores will carry both.
Yeah, I just bought some at the drugstore yesterday. So and also food stores. You know, I had a friend, he paid a lot of money for it, but he got food grade rose water, which is also
I've seen
acceptable.
Some at like bulk stores, like Bulk Barn or like a Whole Foods. Mm-hmm. You're gonna pay too much, but it's there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But if you want to,
you're gonna pay too much. But if you can't find it or you need it today and can't wait for shipping, it's there.
I mean, you can make your own, but it's a tricky business. You know, you have to make sure that that you're on top of the petals and you change the water quickly enough. But I mean, it's a process. You can find out how to do it online if you really need to.
Yeah, absolutely. For some people, that might be a little bit cheaper. Maybe they've got a florist friend or something, or, you know, an Italian grandmother that can hook them up with roses.
Right.
I say that as an Italian person. All of our grandmothers have roses in the garden.
It's true. My Sicilian grandmother had roses. Yeah.
Yeah, they're always, they might be slightly different kinds of roses. I've noticed different Italian grandmothers from different parts of Italy have different kinds of roses, but they all have
That's
roses.
Great.
Yeah. My family's from northern Italy, like almost right up at the border of Slovenia. So,
interesting.
Yeah, we grow different stuff up there than they do down in Sicily.
Yes, you do.
Way different climate. Okay, so getting started with love magic, 3 roses. I really like that. I really like that spell because it was kind of simple and it smells nice. I like roses.
It does. I try everything I do. I try and have it smell nice. I've again, this isn't the first spell book I've come across, and sometimes you get these spell books and the stuff stinks, and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? I can't wear it or put it in my bath because it stinks. But one might work for one person and not for another person. Like, remember my peanut analogy.
Yeah, I really liked your line right near the front of the book. It was one man's trash is another man's ambrosia. And that is so true.
Yeah.
That's so true, especially with love, because I feel like patchouli is a great example. I love patchouli, but to other people it smells like hot garbage. Like
I hate it. We just were talking about being hippies, and I said to my godson yesterday, he's like, what would you use for love? And I was like, not patchouli, although a lot of people would.
Yeah, because you know what? If you can't stand the smell of patchouli, you're not really going to feel love vibes when you're smelling it. But like to us, other people like me who like to smell like they sleep on the ground, it's
I can do it in some mixtures and things like that. But if I was only allowed, like, he was like, what if you were on a deserted island and you wanted to have a lot of sex? What would you bring with you? That's what he asked me.
Oh my God. Who are you having
I know,
sex
I thought it was
with
hilarious. I was like, wow. I'm like, that's beautiful. Okay, so I would bring,
not patchouli, maybe.
Not patchouli, but you might want to bring patchouli, Like you said, you just mentioned you like it. Like, that might be a good thing if you wanted to have a lot of sex on the island.
Yeah.
So.
That's one of my favorite ones because it's always recommended for love, and I think of the people I know who completely hate patchouli, and I'm like, oh, that would not make them feel sexy at all.
Yeah, that's what I said too. I was like, it depends on who I'm going to be with. Maybe they hate patchouli. Maybe they, whatever. I mean, I know. I wish it was so simple that I could just choose one, go-to one. But, that's why I do divination. Everything is different in the situation. But yes, patchouli would be a good go-to one. Personally, I tend to like the florals better. I mentioned being a daughter of Oshun. I love amber. Yeah. That's just such a beautiful, sweet thing to me. And it's also so ancient and, again, primal. Amber. And transformative, so it's one of my favorites.
I really love amber. I love just getting the little blocks that you can get of just amber resin and burning that right on the charcoal disc. It's amazing.
Yes,
it's amazing, and it doesn't really dissipate. Really, you smell that all day. It's fantastic. It makes you feel so good. I used to burn it a lot. In a New Age store I worked at. And I noticed that when I burned that and then opened the doors, I had tons of women especially just coming in and looking at things.
That's great.
They would start picking at things like all of the pink and the red stones and stuff like that. And I noticed it every time, and it really made me happy. I love amber incense. I think it has a strong effect on people, and I really like that.
It does. And it's not, something that's going to disturb a lot of people, I feel like, whereas patchouli is one of those ones that some people don't like. And when they don't like it, they really don't like it.
Yeah, it's polarizing. It's a love it or hate it smell.
Yeah. And I'm always explaining to people about sage. I don't want to be that person that's like, well, you shouldn't do this but that can cause miscarriages in some people, and it can also, dry up people's milk if they're nursing. So I think we need to be sensitive about what's, we're using around people, especially in a public space.
Yeah, you know what? I actually didn't know any of that about sage until I read your book. And I use sage all the time, and I had no idea that it could have such negative effects on pregnant or nursing women. So I'm really glad I read that. But I had never heard that before, and I can't believe that's been left out of all of the conversations and stuff I've had about sage.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's just good to be mindful about these things. I mentioned I did have a lot of education, and some of it, I was at URI for my undergrad, and my minor was in plant science. So there was a lot of, herbalism and ethnobotany and stuff that I studied while I was there. So I think it's important, especially when we're using these things, you mentioned before the black pepper thing, to have a working safety knowledge of a lot of these herbs, because it can be, and there's a lot of really crappy information out there. What did I hear the other day? Bay leaves are psychedelic. I'm like, oh, well, I wish I'd tried that while I was a hippie. There's things that are
that's why my chili's so good. Yeah. I hear stuff like that.
But there's things that do really have effects on people, that could be serious. Like you mentioned, black pepper can make somebody really sick inside. You will be pepper spraying yourself. And then there's things that are just funny, mentioning what smells good and what doesn't. My Santo godmother once, she was cooking eggs and that burned, and then somebody lit a match. So the whole house was full of sulfur. So in her mind, she was like, there's evil in here. And then she was like, no, wait a minute.
Yeah, because if you
just
start to smell
these
sulfur,
conditions that have this negative connotations for people,
Yeah. Sulfur is definitely one of those ones that can freak you out. Yeah.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, the smell of brimstone in your house would be kind of scary all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's funny.
So that was my old joke about voodoo. It's like, oh, I can turn fire into water. You just forget about it. Water into fire. You just forget about it. No, you do. Sometimes things happen and creates conditions.
Yeah. You almost burn the house down, or my room still smells heavily of sage smoke, like it was on fire in there because I couldn't get a bundle to go out last week. And it's just I was grinding it. I'm like, oh my God, please stop. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe there's just something in here and it's got to clear it out. I'm going to walk away. And now I
that happens.
Now I can't get the smell out. I'm like, well,
that happens.
Yeah. Witch mishap. It happens. Happens all the time. Another thing I really liked about your book was, some of the modern spells that deal with technology. I really liked your spell. It's not one that I would use, but I really like your spell about blessing or cleansing the sex toys and tools that you use for sex. I thought that was really, really interesting and modern, and I really liked the story about your friend fixing his phone on your altar.
Oh, that was hilarious.
Because that's something I do during Mercury retrograde. I'm like, oh, my phone's fucking up. So I'll throw it on the altar with a ring of salt around it, and I'll put a rock on top of it, something that's good for electromagnetic stuff, like a pyrite or a amazonite or something like that. And it'll just, an hour later, it'll be working. My sister's
that's great.
She's like, how did that happen? I'm like, I don't know. It just works every time. That's how you fix your phone. So,
no, it does. Somebody was telling me yesterday they charged their phone with some crystals. I was like, oh, that's good. You don't need an emergency battery thing. Just have some crystals. But yeah, the story, for those who haven't read the book, the story was my friend was over here, and I got up in the morning, and I'm having coffee, and he's a yogi master. He was doing yoga, and then he's in front of my altar, and he's having a conversation, and he leaves his phone, and he leaves a bunch of money, and he walks away, and I was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm fixing my phone. It's like, all right, it's between you and them. And his phone was fixed.
Yeah.
By the time I was done with my coffee.
Yeah, and it works for I've done that for a few different things. I've never done it to get someone to call me, although that would be good if you're like, for anything, you know, you're getting ghosted on your blind dates or something like that, or even like you're waiting for like a job interview phone call. It's brilliant. But yeah, I do that all the time. So I really like seeing like these modern things, these more modern uses of like old school love magic. I really like that. How did you... I noticed that a lot of times you mention stuff like the kink community and like, have you noticed, I don't know if it's just me, but have you noticed that there is a lot of overlap between the pagan or magical community and stuff like the kink community or like the polyamorous relationship community? Have you noticed a lot of overlap with that, especially working with love magic with the public?
And I think pagans, as a rule, are supposed to be, and I use that in quotes, more open or more accepting of alternative lifestyles. I do think there is some overlap in the sense that, yes, a lot of people do tend to be involved in both or to be active in both, and that's just... it's just the way it is, I think, you know, probably because it is accepting and it is... You know, if you're open to, you know, it's an earth-based religion. You know, that's my definition of pagan. I know other people have other definitions, but it comes from many years of friendship and conversations with Ida Bonowitz, who I love, and, you know, he's not with us anymore. But, you know, I think that, you know, he was really influential in using that terminology, and that's why I use it to describe what I do. But a lot of them are in touch with nature and therefore in touch with their own both sexuality and spirituality, and also alternative use of clothing, which I know can be, I'm not one to be running around sky-clad at an event, but I know a lot of people do. Yeah. And I think that should be their right, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I love being naked, but I'd prefer it if I was like in the pool or the lake or something. I'm not really into sitting like on a log full of bugs in the nude or anything like that, so I just don't.
Bring a towel. That's my advice to those people.
I have to. Even like, it doesn't matter where I'm sitting in the nude. I gotta have something under me. But yeah, so I'm the same way with that. I really laughed how many times you said like the Wiccans and Skyclad. It made me happy. Made me happy. I love it.
Yeah. But again, I wanted there to be stuff in there for everybody, you know, and a lot of people think that they're going to pick up a love magic book and it's going to have things about love and sex. And I wanted to just be all inclusive for the portion of people that I know that are into that kind of thing. And also safe. I mean, the BDSM spell that I have in there is about safety and protection and manifestation of what you want through those means.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was. That was a really interesting spell. Like I said, that's not something I would have an occasion to use, but I found it really interesting, and it was like one of those things where I'm like happy that someone else will see it and get use out of it, because I thought it was really cool.
I've had a lot of good feedback about it. I mean, people were like shocked and surprised and laughing and all of those things. But I think that to me is just an indicator that, you know, there are a lot of people that do welcome that kind of thing included in there, you know. Well, I mean, maybe there is something, you know, and not just that spell, but I mean, there might be something about, oh, I never used this crystal in this way, or I never used this herb in this way, you know, and this is something, you know, like you said, there's all different cultures in there. There's, you know, for example, there's, you know, in Hindu culture, there's a lot of marigolds that they use for weddings and things like that. Now, for us, we would use marigolds for something else, more protection, which to me, as an herbalist, makes sense because marigolds are very often used as an insecticide. It's one of those things that like just keeps away bugs and other yucky stuff, you know? So
when I think of marigolds, I always think of the Day of the Dead.
Yes. Always. And then there's also ancestors you would think of as well. You know, you wouldn't think of it as a love thing. But, you know, knowing that it's a traditional Hindu wedding flower, then that opens up a whole new context for people to be able to use it and see that flower as something different.
Yeah, absolutely. I love reading books. Lately, I've found a lot more books that are very inspired by hoodoo and voodoo practices. And I've been seeing a lot of different uses for a lot of herbs I was kind of familiar with. So I loved the little section where you listed out some of the herbs you regularly use, because a lot of them had different uses than I had used before. And that's a new thing I've noticed in newer books that I'm really happy about.
Yeah, I think it was really important to put in there, Judika Isles is my editor and a dear friend of mine, and she was like, this is a good idea. And I was like, I agree.
She's so great. I love her books. She's so great.
I know. She's so wonderful, and she's been so kind and helpful to me over the years. I'm really honored.
Yeah, she seems like a really cool person. I recommend her books to everybody all the time. I'm like, no, seriously, you're going to find something you like in this book. I'm 100% positive about it.
Yeah. So I think that I really wanted to have something. She does that in all her books. I wanted to have something like that in the book so people could just go to it. And it's not, you know what I mean? You don't have to read this book cover to cover. Some people have been interviewing me and they're like, I read it cover to cover. I'm like, well, that's great, but you don't have to. You can just say, okay, the relatives are coming over, so I need a spell to make sure nobody fights over the holidays or for this birthday or whatever, know?
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool reference book. Really cool reference book for like tons of different stuff. Like I said, like when you're clearing your house or something like that, there's tons of little spells in there for like happy home stuff. Like I said, that Bob Marley One Love spell really made it feel nice in here. So like tons of usefulness out of this book as a reference book.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so too. I really hope you sell like 1 million copies and get super rich off of it, because I really like it, and I'm excited to have more. I'm excited to have a modern love magic book out there. I work in New Age stores kind of frequently, and I always have trouble when people ask me about love magic, because I'll look at the shelf, and it'll be stuff like older love spell books that came out when I was a kid. A lot of them are written by Silver Ravenwolf and other authors I remember from the early 90s, and they're not something I really recommend to modern people. And I feel like your book is a very good deviation from that.
Thank you. I mean, I think, like I said, I wanted to have something that was for everybody out there and all different types of love. And that's really, what this is. But don't get me wrong, there's also sex spells in there and everything else. Yeah. So,
Oh, yeah. This book is like fun and steamy. There's tons of really fun, steamy stuff in here. I had a lot of fun with some of the steamier sex spells. Voodoo and hoodoo are something that I've noticed are getting a little bit more popular. Like, it seems like a lot more people are inspired by voodoo and hoodoo now, or maybe just they're becoming a lot more okay with it now that people are realizing that the reason they didn't practice voodoo before is usually because of this kind of racist situation that's happened, especially in North America. But I've noticed it coming up a lot more now. Santeria, which you mention a few times in the book, is something that I don't hear as much about, but that I find really interesting. In the book you mentioned Santeria, and I'm trying to find the name here. I wanted to ask you about the name of Santeria. It mentioned it a few times in here that it's got Lukumi.
Lukumi, yeah.
Okay, Lukumi. This is what I wanted to ask about. Can you talk a little bit about Santeria and Lukumi, and a little bit about where did this name come from, and a little bit about Santerian practice, as much as you can share anyways?
Well, Lukumi comes from the Lukumi people in, West Africa, specifically Nigeria, which is where a lot of the practices that are more commonly known as Santeria come from. So I think that, if somebody you can say in Santo or in Lukumi or in Ifa, they're all different variations of the religious tradition. But I think that Santeria, like the word voodoo, Santeria has a lot of negative connotations out there. So a lot of people don't like to identify themselves that way. And I make the distinction because I want to respect that. But part of what I did in my first book, Voodoo and Afro-Caribbean Paganism, which is technically out of print, but you can still get it online if you look and things like that.
Yeah, you can find
I don't get any money. If you find a free download, just take it because I don't get any money.
Yeah, I found some new and used.
Yeah. I mean, I sell signed copies for people who want those. But anyway, cool. So, what Isaac was running Bonowitz, who I mentioned, was running a pagan publishing house at the time. It didn't stay open for very long, but he really urged me to write that book as sort of a comparison of where from all the different places in Africa did people come from to bring the different variations of the Afro-Caribbean, Afro-diasporan tradition. So I really went back and you can see it somewhat in the names. Like in Haiti, we mentioned there's divinity called Erzuli Frida Dahomey, which, the Dahomey were people in West Africa as well. So obviously a lot of the home spirits from Dahomey were transferred over here when those people were transported to Haiti. So that's what happened in that situation. And when I mentioned Cuban and Puerto Rican Santo, a lot of those beliefs came over from the Lukumi people. So, and that has been, which is interesting, especially in that tradition, you've got evidence of people going back as early as the early 1800s back to Africa to make sure the prayers were right, making sure, you mentioned herbs, making sure they had the right herbs that they could use. So people would pay out of their own pocket, free people of color to go back to Africa and then to come back to Cuba again with some of those herbs and things like that. And, now Cuba is finally opened up, but for so many years it was separated because of Castro and because of things like that. So in a lot of ways, in the same way that Haitian independence sort of made Haiti, isolated, Cuba was isolated. So you've got a lot of more traditional things going on because they were of a more isolated society and less blending than you would get, say, in a place like New Orleans.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you noticed that more and more people, like younger people especially, are getting into Santeria and are examining like Afro-Caribbean pagan spiritualities?
I think it doesn't have the same stigma, especially for people of color, that it did 20 years ago. And that makes me really happy. I went to an event, a Haitian community event, and two of the artists that were speaking were also Mambo priestesses in the Haitian voodoo tradition, and they could come out and say that. And I just thought that was really beautiful because I know that 10 or 15 years ago, that would not have been something that was so easy for them to just present to a mixed crowd of people who were there for a community event rather than a religious event or a specifically voodoo event. So that made me proud. One was young, like my daughter's age, like 25, 26, and the other one was closer to my age, but it was a full spectrum of things, and that was really beautiful. So I think there is more acceptance, especially among the Afro-Caribbean people. But there's still events where people will back away from me when I tell them I practice voodoo, and it makes me sad, But I do think that especially the younger generation, my daughter's generation, it is something that people are more able and accepted about these days.
Yeah, voodoo and hoodoo, I've noticed, have become quite popular. I live right near Detroit, Michigan. And there's lots of, in recent years anyways, voodoo and hoodoo practitioners and stores that sell stuff like that have become a lot more noticeable. They were probably always there, but they've become a lot more noticeable, and I'm starting to catch wind of them, and so are other people that live even over here across the border. So I've noticed that a lot of Afro-Caribbean spiritual religions are coming much more into the forefront and becoming a lot less shady, like something that people are afraid to talk about.
Yeah, and I think that's beautiful. I mean, for years we were persecuted because of it, and, got a bad rap about curses and hexes and voodoo dolls and all of that nonsense. So for it to have evolved into something that people can really see is a beautiful tradition that honors the Loa and the Orisha and the ancestors. And, again, I believe it's a pagan system, not in a bad way, but in the sense that it's an earth-based system, and we honor these forces in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I had the pleasure of attending a ritual by the Niagara Voodoo Shrine.
Oh, they're good friends of mine. I have known them for over 20 years.
That was really cool. That was my first time ever. That was my first time seeing the dragon ritual drummers or seeing them do any sort of ritual. And it was a ritual to Dr. John in New Orleans there. And I found it to be really, really interesting and really powerful. It was really musical, which I was like, all right, this is really for me. I love that. And it was really, really interesting. And I felt kind of weird being shocked by this, but I was shocked by how many younger white people I saw there, like my age and younger. And I started to think about it. I'm like, oh no, what if this is becoming one of those things? So what kind of advice can you give to younger people who are interested in Afro-Caribbean religions to make sure that they don't cross that line and become culturally appropriative or take spaces, from other people who have more ancestral connection?
Oh, this is great. Like, thank you so much for asking that. And thank you so much for, now I get to call Utu and tell him he's got to listen to this. So
yeah, you know what? He was really cool. I had a weird rash on my face, and he put healing water on my face, and I swear to God it was gone the next day. So
that's beautiful.
You can tell that guy that I love him, and like that was a really cool experience for me. So
oh, that's so beautiful. Yay. Yeah. No, like I said, I've been friends with him for over 20 years. So, well, probably because that would say, whatever, how old we were. So I can't really say how long. But
yeah, you don't want to give anyone any specifics here. Yeah.
Right. We're the same age. I'll just say that. And we've been friends for a long time. But, I think that, and that's what makes his house, the Niagara Voodoo Shrine, so unique in a lot of what's happening these times. For those of you who aren't familiar with the band and the guys, that the Niagara Voodoo Shrine was born of the Dragon Ritual Drummers ritual drum troupe, and Witch Dr. Utu is the head of the troupe. I guess that's the best way to, without having it sound like anything else. And the founder. But when he does a ritual, he makes sure to give honor to the spirits, to give honor to both of us are members of Priestess Miriam's Rampart Street Voodoo Temple, which is now located at 1428 Rampart Street. For those of you who know both of us, you can go back and look at, last year this time she had a fire. Yes. So that we were both there helping her put things back together. So he always makes sure to give tribute to Priestess Miriam and to where we come from. And that, I think, is what's most important. I really think that remembering that is what's most important. When he is somewhere and Miriam is also there, he makes sure to give her proper honor and respect and tribute, and that's something that he never forgets. Now, if we look at some of the other houses that are out there, I think it's very easy to lose the fact that this is a religion that was born of people of color. Yeah. And I'm not going to call anybody out by name, but if you're going to a priestess who's, you're looking around and everybody's of Anglo descent, and the priestess of us of Anglo descent or Jewish descent,
that maybe this ain't legit.
Yes, and, how are people conducting themselves? What are they doing? What's their, it's important to ask somebody what your spiritual lineage is. And I mentioned, that the Niagara Voodoo Shrine is always very respectful of their lineage. I try you heard me already mention Priestess Miriam. So
and actually he talked about Priestess Miriam and the New Orleans Voodoo Shrine, like right at the beginning before anything else started, kind of at length. And I was like, this guy's pretty legit.
Because we would never not do that. That's who we are and where we come from. So we would never not do that, even though, I have my own space here and he has his own space up there. We are very connected. I just mentioned we were there scrubbing off statues. We are very connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And
to our parent house and what our spiritual roots are. And we try and remember that. You mentioned Dr. John. I work for the choreographer Dr. John, and a lot of my dance work has been to honor the original Dr. John. Yeah. There's a work, for those who are interested more about Dr. John, there's a work by Louis Martinet about Dr. John, the original Dr. John, that Utu and I both have pieces in that you can get from Black Moon Publishing. But we know what our heritage is, and we're always trying to point people to that. And I think that, you show up for who shows up. The problem becomes when people start proclaiming themselves authorities, that they don't have proper training, that they don't give proper respect. And that's where the problem really comes from. I mean, I'll say this, I was censored by a major Muslim multimedia news outlet, who I will not name by name, but people can imagine, and whitewashed by them because they wanted to do a story about the, whiter priestesses in New Orleans. Yeah. So that made me really sad. That made me really sad. And maybe I'm just an angry Black woman, but I think I'm allowed to be an angry Black woman about things like this.
I blame you. I can't
after being interviewed by somebody for hours and then they decide to go to the person that looks like a more unusual, quirky, clickbait choice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I've been seeing kind of a lot of. I've met a lot of there's no easy way to say it. I've met a lot of white people who are, hoodoo or voodoo practitioners, and after talking to them for a little while, it kind of becomes clear that everything they learned about voodoo, they learned from all white people and books written by white people. And I'm not saying that white people can't write anything legit about hoodoo or voodoo, but to me, it seems like there's a problem there. It just seems like there's something missing. And
I mean, I have slightly different ideas about this, probably because I'm a person of color than some of the people in the tradition. But I feel like we really start to lose it, like you said, looking around and if there's nobody there who's a person of color, what are we doing? You know what I mean? I'm not saying we need to grab token people off the street, but I've been involved in a lot of discussions lately about how do we make people of color feel welcome in these situations. It's not like people of color don't exist, but what are we doing to make people of color feel welcome and a part of what we're doing?
That's exactly how it feels. It's like, okay, so what is it about this situation that feels unwelcoming to people of color? Because that's what needs to go. And I often get a little bit like, I start to think this is maybe not so legitimate, or maybe it's like a red flag. It's just, it's a bright red flag.
It should be a red flag.
Yeah, it's a bright red flag.
And I respect you for saying that. I think people miss that point. And I'm not saying that you can't have, people who are of many different colors and traditions. I know one Babalawo who's an Asian man. Obviously you can have people of many different traditions there. But again, if we're not welcoming people of color, then what are we doing? And I think that, individuals need to think about it. Organizers need to think about it. Look at the people who are presenting at your event. How many of them are women? How many of them are people of color? How many of them are, LGBTQ? Like, we need to just really open this discussion up and make these people feel welcome, because they haven't felt welcome for so long. It's not fair.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just something I've noticed lately, because I've noticed this kind of resurgence among kind of, like I said, it was probably always there under the surface, but it just wasn't something that was in my frame of reference, right? But I've noticed a lot more hoodoo and voodoo, and I noticed once I look down the line, it's like all white people in this one group, and I'm like, I don't know. I just don't know about all that. So is there, in the book you mentioned a lot of times the Loa from voodoo, or the Orishas. Is there anything that people that don't have any sort of ancestral connection, or kind of new to things like voodoo or Santeria, is there anything that they could really do wrong to upset any Loa or Orisha, kind of by accident, or is there anything they can do to maybe smooth things over a little bit?
Well, I think, and this is the most important thing when we're having these discussions about, who's practicing what and who's getting paid for what and all of this. We're all from Africa originally. I mentioned I'm an anthropologist. When you go back, the earliest signs of modern man are in Africa. So, we all have this connection as the birthplace of humanity in a lot of ways, and I think we need to remember that and honor that in ourselves. And that's the first step. But there are a lot of things you can do wrong, of course. I think that
there's always something you can do wrong.
Get to be angry priestess for a minute, but a lot of people, I've heard stories of people masturbating to Orisha. I've heard stories about people thinking they were, having weird sex. That doesn't have anything to do with what our tradition is. People, you mentioned magical ethics. Would you walk up to somebody in the street you've never met and ask them to give you $10,000, or ask them to give you your husband? No, or that your wife. That's not gonna. No, that's not gonna. It's not gonna happen. So, part of the thing about these traditions is that they're based on initiation. They're based on years of study. They're based on years of training and apprenticeship and things like that. So when you talk about me or some of the other practitioners, look and see what is their lineage, what is their heritage, how long have they been practicing before they have been doing what they do, so don't go out there. I know one idiot woman who decided she was going to throw a necklace into the river and ask Oshun for, a lover. And I'm like, but that's not how it works. No. You know what I mean? You can't make up the rules in these traditions. You have to be, it's not something we do in a vacuum. And there's a reason for that, because you need to have a system of checks and balances. You need to have somebody to go, no, don't feed this one peanuts, because if you feed this one peanuts, they could die, and you might not be aware of those things unless you are initiated and in contact with somebody who's been doing it longer and learn from somebody who was doing it longer than them, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. My big rule is, like, just ask somebody. Like, just ask somebody else if you are fucking up or not. Most people are really eager to tell you if you're doing anything wrong.
Yeah. Well, and question your thoughts. I mean, it's good to have self-confidence and believe in yourself. But I was doing a workshop once and I lit a candle for Oshun, just like I mentioned, I'm a daughter of Oshun. So that's a normal thing for me to do, especially when I'm talking about her. And the woman afterwards, it was an event that they had dogs. She ran up and she dipped her finger in the candle wax for Oshun and consecrated the dog somehow. Yikes. And then left before I got to go, and so,
wow, wild.
And then I saw her the next year, and I was like, "Are you the woman that consecrated I have a good memory. That consecrated the dog with the wax?" And she was like, "Yes." And I said, "What happened?" She goes, "Well, it eats all my underwear now." And I'm like, "Okay." Yeah. So, it makes sense. She's a love goddess. That's, but it's, it's just ridiculous. Some people are just ridiculous. I was like, what did you do that for? What made you think somebody else asked me. I was like, what makes you think this is a good idea? And it's not where, and this is, again, where Isaac was very helpful to me. If you're talking about a system like where you're worshiping Aphrodite or something, yes, there have been small pockets of people that have been worshiping Aphrodite over the years, but it's not the same kind of strong, powerful, continuous systematized, religion that we're talking about when we're talking about Lukumi or Haitian voodoo. So we've got hundreds of years of these are the rules, and this is what happens if you do this, and this is what happens if you do this. So you don't need to go channel what they want. There's a way to find out exactly what they want, and it might not be simple, but that's the way it's done.
Yeah, if you want to do the work, you're just going to have to do it right. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. I mean, again, if I could equate it to cooking, I was doing a cooking class once, and this woman's like decides to take over the rice, and she's over with the rice, and she's stirring the rice every 10 seconds, and she's looking at the rice, and I'm like, what is she doing? But I was like, all right, maybe she's got some weird way of cooking rice that I've never heard of. Yeah. Her husband was like, she's never made rice before. I don't know what she was doing. The rice was horrible, obviously, because that's not how you cook rice, poking at it every 2 seconds. So, sometimes you need to know what the rules are in order to make a decent plate of rice. Yeah. And it's the same thing here. You can't just go run out and throw something into the river and think that's how it's done.
Yeah, Titanic style love spells. Okay, so I think that's all of the questions that I had today. Is there anything else that you wanna say about the book, or about love magic in general?
No, just how important self-love is, how important divination is, to realize what part of the process you're in, and things are going to get better if you're in a negative place, because that's a natural cycle of things. Maybe you're not looking at things in a proper way. I did a reading once for another famous pagan author. I won't mention her name, but those who know the story will know her, and she wanted a reading about love, and I gave it to her, and it turned out she was looking in the wrong place, and she ended up with a female partner that she never thought she would be with, but she's so happy. They're married now, and that's awesome. Things are wonderful. So sometimes I think that, I'm not saying everybody needs to change their sexual preference, but it could be something that you're just not thinking of that really might bring you happiness and joy. It could be right around the corner. And if you have a mindset that's negative, it's going to be that much harder to get to the corner and to make it around and see what's there.
Yeah. I loved all your mentions about divination, because I think I'd never thought about it before, and I think that's exactly how all your love spells should start, because it's really hard to be objective about yourself and about love, especially. We get so... Our brains go so wild over it that I feel like a lot of times it's hard to be objective. So hitting up your tarot cards or your pendulum or whatever beforehand is an amazing idea.
No, of course. I think that's very important. Very, very important. And again, it helps you focus on what you're supposed to be focusing on. Maybe there's something more important you need to focus on with money or health or, those basic things for survival that you need to be focusing on, as important as love is. And it really is important. Sometimes the universe is telling you need to be focused on something else. And I know that doesn't sound like an endorsement for the book, but the book will really help you focus on those things. The book will help you focus on yourself.
In there, yeah. Yeah, the book's got tons of other kinds of love. Just because it's not time for a relationship doesn't mean it's not time for love. They'll figure it out.
Right. If that's what your reading says, that it's not, the relationship of your dreams isn't coming by 5 o'clock tonight.
Yeah.
Do
some other stuff for a little while. Yeah.
Yeah. You can't do something else to love yourself or to help your pets or your family or your friends or your home or any of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, yeah, that was everything I had. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. This was wonderful.
Yeah, have a really good rest of your Sunday.
Yeah, you too. Enjoy.
Thank you so much to Lilith for coming on the show, and also to Erin at Red Wheel Weiser, who recommended the book to me and actually sent it my way. I might not have picked it out on my own, so I'm really glad I got to get a little out of my element or my comfort zone there. Although, you know what? I only thought this was a little bit out of my comfort zone. Apparently, I really love magic, so that's exciting. Actually, the interview came at the exact right time because Beyonce actually performed in full Oshun regalia later that day. I know I'm putting it out on the 21st here, but I actually recorded this that weekend. And later, when I saw Beyonce, or really when I saw Oshun, I had this feeling like, oh, hey, girl, I was just talking about you like just a minute ago. So, thanks to Beyonce, Oshun is a deity that everyone has become a little bit more familiar with this year. And thank you to Lilith for her book, who talks a little bit more about her there. And I'm hoping that means that all of this resurgence with Oshun means that a whole wealth of love is coming at all of us in the future, because I feel like we could all need it. So thank you for tuning into the Fat Feminist Witch Podcast. As always, you can find me at thefatfeministwitch.com and on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest. I believe there's a Tumblr and a Google Plus out there as well. So if you like the show and you want to keep it going, please consider reviewing it on Facebook. You can find my Facebook page and post a little review there and sharing it with your friends. You can also shop through my store for witchy supplies and books. My online store is called Blue Moon Magic and Metaphysics, and you can find that at facebook.com/Blue Moon Magic Shop, magic with a K. It's a whole brand new Facebook page, so I would really love if more of you could check it out and tell me what you think. So I hope you all have a very magical rest of your week and a very loving rest of this midwinter season. Ostara is our next holiday coming up, and that'll be around the middle of March, along with the coming of spring, the spring equinox. I'm so excited. So have a very magical rest of your week, everybody. Good night.